Brian Leishman to move the motion.
Good afternoon, Dame McDonagh. It is an honour to serve under your chairship today, and I beg to move that the House has considered the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. It is also an honour to bring this debate to Westminster Hall. I am delighted to see so many parliamentary colleagues in attendance, and with that being the case, I am not planning to take up my full allotted 10 minutes, as there is obvious enthusiasm amongst members to participate in the coming hour. And there are many colleagues here that have been passionate campaigners for justice for many years, and I would like to hear as many speeches as possible this afternoon. On the 19th of July 2024, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, delivered its advisory opinion in respect of the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. The ICJ were clear that Israel's occupation, annexation and continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territories is unlawful, and that Israel is under an obligation to end its unlawful presence in the OPT as rapidly as possible with the evacuation of all settlers from existing settlements. The court built on the determination that Israel has committed systemic violations of international humanitarian law by recognising that Israel has permanently acquired territory by force and suppressed the right of Palestinians to self-determination. And when the Minister rises to his feet later in this debate, can he confirm that the Government agrees that the occupation is illegal and will call on Israel to comply with the ICJ and demand an end to the occupation? And while the UK has called for an end to settlement expansion, does the Government agree that Israel must comply with the ICJ and not only stop settlement expansion, but also that Israel must evacuate settlers from Palestinian land? I failed it all.
Imran Hussain.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and can I congratulate him on bringing this very important and timely debate here today. And he's absolutely right in pointing out that this is perhaps the most substantial advisory opinion on Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories, which makes it clear settlements are illegal, as is Israel's ongoing expansion of them. Settlement goods are illegal, as is the import of them. So does he agree with me that this places a particular and clear obligation on our government to act immediately and abide by international law?
Brian Leishman.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan, and also to my honourable friend from Bradford East. Thank you very much for your intervention. And yes, completely, I'm in agreement, and I would like to pay testament to the work that you have brought in bringing this issue to Parliament in the primary chamber. I would also appreciate if the Minister could explain why, to quote the UK Ambassador to the UN, that we did support the central findings of the ICJ's advisory opinion, but then the UK abstained at the UN General Assembly on the 18th of September 2024, where an overwhelming majority of nations supported the ICJ's advisory opinion and demanded that Israel bring to an end without delay its unlawful occupation, no later than 12 months' time, by the 18th of September 2025. Israel has developed and maintained its settlements through forced removal and displacement of Palestinians. The court's opinion is that Israel has the obligation to make reparation for the damage caused to all the natural or legal persons concerned in the occupied Palestinian territories.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will do.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful case for action. Would you agree with Amnesty International that one of the practical measures the UK government could take would be to ban goods produced in the illegal Israeli settlements?
Brian Leishman.
Thanks once again, Dame Siobhan, and thank you to my honourable friend from Poole for raising that topic. That is something that I mention more length later on in my contribution, but yes, you can rest assured that I do. I'm in firm agreement with you. Dame Siobhan, the ICJ advisory opinion is significant because it adds to the growing international consensus that Israel is committing the crime against humanity of apartheid against Palestinians. And that language is extremely important because the international community has and continues to witness annexation, occupation, segregation and apartheid. The world is the witness of crimes against humanity. And while the UK government is in denial about what constitutes a genocide, millions of our own citizens, Amnesty International as aforementioned, and many nations from the international community are not. I will do.
Andrew George.
And he's making a very powerful point which I strongly endorse. And of course he can go further because of course we're well aware that the new US administration is now recommending the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So on top of the UK government making clear its abhorrence of all of the actions which he's just described, they should also make it very clear that they strongly oppose the proposals coming from the US as well.
Brian Leishman.
Thank you to the honourable gentleman for that contribution as well. And I think it's fair to say that when we look at President Trump's recent comments, it takes us into a new and rather diabolical position in the efforts to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people from their homeland. His comments about making Gaza a Riviera of the Middle East are frankly appalling and an explicit denial of Palestinian people's right to self-determination. The hard truth is that the UK needs introspection, to look at what we have done and what we continue to do to allow these dreadful acts of death and destruction to happen with impunity. I put it to the Minister, please explain why the UK have sold and continue to sell arms to Israel, arms that have been used in committing atrocities against the Palestinian people. And I will do.
The intervention, and I thank him for securing the debate here today, which is indeed on a very important subject. I recently attended a talk by Professor Mahmoud, who demonstrated with images and with his own testimony the kinds of injuries that are being sustained by some people in Palestine, notably a 7-year-old boy whose injuries were so symmetrical that they couldn't have been done by human hand. They'd clearly been done by a drone. So does the member agree with me that we need to also be thinking about the export of items which are not in and of themselves militaristic, but which can be weaponised, as drones are being in Palestine, and that we have to consider having export bans on those items too?
Brian Leishman.
Thank you very much, my honourable friend from Glasgow West. I wholeheartedly agree, and again, that is something that I will turn on later on in my contribution when we look at a variety of actions that the UK government could undertake. I also put it to the Minister to defend the words and lack of action from our government that have enabled the Israeli blockades to continue, blockades that stopped life-saving aid, food, water and medicine from reaching besieged Palestinians who were starving and in the most dire need. I think historical context is vital because the persecution Palestinians suffer from is not a recent event. This treatment didn't start in October 2023. For Palestinians, the Nakba began many decades ago. From the mass dispossession of the Palestinian people in 1947 and 48 to the present day, ethnic cleansing has been a constant. The seizing of land and homes, the forced displacement, the destruction of civic, educational, cultural and religious infrastructure, which are all protected by international conventions and treaties to which this country is a committed signatory, are all examples of settler colonialism and Israeli government-authorised apartheid that sees removal of the local population through ethnic cleansing. For decades, the international community has looked away and ignored the suffering of the Palestinian people. So I put it to our government, through the Minister, that the time for the UK to show international and moral leadership is long overdue, especially regarding Palestine. Our nation's role as the former colonial power in Palestine, issuing and implementing the Balfour Declaration of 1917, presiding over the dispossession and disenfranchisement of the Palestinian people, has incurred a historical debt, which continues to grow the longer we refuse to stand up for the inalienable rights of Palestinians. Will the Minister commit to the UK Government undertaking a thorough review of its diplomatic, political, trade, economic and military relations with Israel to identify any aspects that assist and empower Israel's illegal occupation and to stop those aspects? Will the UK Government suspend trade privileges, agreements and negotiations with Israel pending the outcome of that thorough review? I will do.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for Alloa and for securing this very important debate, and he is making a really passionate speech for the situation that we see in Gaza. But would the Minister agree with me on that specific point? Would the Member of Parliament agree with me on this point? The Foreign Secretary's statement that we will not have economic sanctions against Israel because we have a £6.1 billion trade deal is an absolute abhorrent statement, and we should reverse that statement as soon as possible, because one of the biggest argument against the abolition of slavery was of the financial cost that it would have on our country. Would the Minister agree?
Ryan Lishman.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the honourable member from Leicester South for his contribution today. Yes, quite simply, yes, I'm in agreement. It's an appalling statement, and basically, I would like to think that our country is frankly better than putting a pounds and pence figure on the cost of humanitarian disaster and genocide. I also put to the Minister, will the UK Government ban the importation of goods from illegal Israeli settlements, which facilitate and give credibility to their existence? And the banning of the importing of goods from Israel's illegal settlements brings in line our commitments to international law and human rights. The ICJ is clear that all states have an obligation not to recognise, aid or assist in maintaining the illegal situation of occupation, to stop providing assistance that sustains the occupation and to ensure compliance with international law through diplomatic and economic measures. Dame Siobhan, in conclusion, the UK Government has a very simple choice to make. Whether we side with an apartheid state that has seized territory, displaced and then contained people into an open-air prison, eradicated communities and centuries of culture, ethnically cleansed the people and committed genocide, or do we join the call many in the international community have already made for full compliance with international law, to recognise the state of Palestine and justice for its indomitable people?
I'm sorry to say this. I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. Please don't take that to be a promise. As everybody can see, there's a lot of people wanting to speak. We will endeavour to get through absolutely everybody. That is our hope. At the moment, we think it's around 2 minutes. But should it prove more, we will let people know. I call Jim Shannon.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for Alloa and Grangemouth for setting the scene. Gentlemen, ladies, gentlemen, fellow members, I will have a different opinion. I respect your point of view. I hope you respect mine. I am and always have been a steadfast friend of Israel. My commitment to the State of Israel is rooted in its right to exist as a secure and democratic homeland for the Jewish people. For me, that principle is non-negotiable. I hope that my remarks will reflect both my empathy and my unwavering belief in Israel's right to defend itself. The ICJ's measures initiated by South Africa reflect a deeply flawed and one-sided interpretation of international law. Israel has a sovereign right and indeed the duty to protect its citizens from the barbaric terrorist organisation Hamas. The petitioners in this case conveniently ignore Hamas's atrocities, the deliberate targeting of civilians, the massacre of innocent men, women and children, and the use of Palestine civilians as human shields. I support the principle of a two-state solution. However, let us be clear. Peace cannot coexist with Hamas's continued aggression. Every time Israel has made significant concessions, whether during the Oslo Accords or the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, it has been met with an escalation in violence and not in peace. If Hamas retains power, it will be a failed state from the outset, one that continues to launch rockets into Israel towns and incite hatred against Jews worldwide. Peace will only be possible when the Palestine leadership prioritises economic stability and coexistence over terrorism and destruction. A weakened Israel emboldens its adversaries, most notably Iran, Hezbollah and radical Islamist movements. These entities do not simply wish for an end to Israel's military operations, they desire Israel's total annihilation. The ICJ may issue opinions, but it's not infallible. We must challenge rulings that fail to acknowledge Israel's security needs, that excuse Hamas's barbarism, and that seek to delegitimise a nation's right to exist. The UK must continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, not just in words, but in action. And that's my point of view, and I hope the members will respect my point of view as I will respect theirs. Thank you.
I wish to clarify, I am imposing a hard limit on 2 minutes, so I will ask you to sit down if you go over 2 minutes, just to clarify. And the question is that this House has considered the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. I call Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan McDonough. I thank my honourable friend, the member for Alloa and Grangemouth, for securing this debate, which comes at a critical time for the Palestinian people, the future of Gaza and the very foundations of international law. These are under direct threat by the recent elected so-called leader of the free world, who has proposed ethnic cleansing that violate the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to return to their homeland and to live free from occupation. His threat to withdraw aid to Jordan and Egypt if they reject his so-called Gaza development plan have ignited a sharp wave of backlash. His proposals are a blueprint for a crime of historic proportions, and our government must condemn and resist. This must, of course, mean accepting in full the historic advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice made in July last year that confirmed that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is unlawful and found Israel guilty of violating the international prohibition of racial segregation and apartheid. So let us be clear, it's not optional to follow the advisory opinion. The UK has clear obligations under international law as a UN member state and a permanent member of the UN Security Council. For a year and a half, myself and others in this House have called for urgent action to hold Israel accountable for the indiscriminate targeting of civilians and the near total destruction in the Gaza Strip. But we must stand unequivocally and unashamedly for upholding international law, and in doing so for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. And any further delay or refusal to do so risks the escalation of crimes of unimaginable proportion, as well as continuing to negate our responsibilities, meaningfully oppose the decades-long crimes of occupation. Thank you.
Ayub Khan.
And Grangemouth for securing this important debate. I'm not going to repeat what's already been set out, but I think the British people, Chair, want to hear politicians that sit in this chamber speak the truth. And when you hear this repeated suggestion that somehow the 40-odd thousand, more than 40,000 innocent men, women and children which have been massacred was somehow human shield, this nonsense of an argument that we constantly hear. I tell you what, most British people know the truth because they see it on social media. The only evidence of human shields is that which the Israeli army has used. And we have seen it documented, and international organisations have confirmed it. And what's interesting is any reputable organisation that has made adverse findings against the Israeli army, the Israeli leadership, they are immediately labelled as anti-Semitic, somehow diluting the very essence of that word. And I, for one, will say that, of course, anyone with a moral compass wants to support peace, stability for the Israelis and the Palestinians. That is paramount. But it is very sickening when I constantly hear a disparity of argument when the Palestinians are dehumanized. Today we read about one individual that was killed in Ukraine by a missile in the BBC. One individual. Not to say that that's not important. Of course it is. Any loss of innocent lives is important. But you could kill thousands of children in Gaza, and it barely makes headlines. And the atrocities which are now taking place in the West Bank is continuing. And we must do all that we can to support the Palestinians.
Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Lady McDonald. It's indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the member for Alloa and Grangemouth for bringing this debate today. Less than 2 months ago, we were in this Westminster Hall debate, and indeed the Minister was here present, when I was quite passionate about the intentions of Netanyahu. In that debate on the 16th of December, I stated unequivocally that the intentions of Netanyahu was to displace Palestinians into Egypt and Jordan. Lo and behold, what do we hear from last week? That is exactly the intention of Netanyahu, and now he's joined by President Trump. To me, that is no less than ethnic cleansing. This government, and we must call it out for what it is ethnic cleansing, no other words for it. I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend.
Tisha Mohammed.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Ethnic cleansing is a practice that we see taking place, but so is annexation of the West Bank. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the peace process is not an end result, but recognition must be a byproduct of the peace process? But actually this is coming inevitably to an end with the ongoing annexation that we see, and that Palestinians must have a recognised state.
Tahir Ali.
I thank you. I thank my colleague from Sheffield Central for that important intervention. It is again another point that I've been quite vociferous on. To have a two-state solution, you can only achieve that if the UK government recognises both states. By recognising one state, you can never achieve two-state solution. It's almost saying that we agree with Netanyahu, who simply wants one-state solution. That is not the way forward for a peace process, and it should not be taken lightly, what is being said, and our denial is almost a complicity in that agenda. As of today, we have seen over 50,000 Palestinians who have been killed, thousands remain missing and the fate unknown, and countless families have been expelled from their houses. Humanitarian aid has been consistently denied, worsening an already a catastrophic situation. The ceasefire 3 weeks ago brought a sigh of relief across the world. As fragile as it was, and our government has been repeating that, it almost now has become clear that Netanyahu, in preventing aid getting to the Gazans as part of the deal, was the one who's reneged on that ceasefire deal. More must be done to make sure that that ceasefire continues. And the harsh words that are being used against the Palestinians by Netanyahu and President Trump have to be called out.
Richard Ford.
Chairship. We are at a pivotal moment in history where the international rule of law, established and affirmed after World War II, is on the brink of being disregarded by some of the very states that created this international system. The International Court of Justice, established in 1945, has a critical role in promoting peace and resolving disputes between states. Since its inception, the ICJ has seen approximately 90% of its rulings implemented. The ICJ is quite literally the world court, And by suggesting that its authority somehow is not recognised and respected because it doesn't apply to one single state, cannot abide. Last year, the ICJ ruling declared Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territories as unlawful. While the ruling is legally binding in its principles, it is advisory in nature, and its implementation will depend on the political will of states in the international community to make it so. The horrific attacks carried out by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October were appalling, and they, too, must not go unpunished. But Israel's response to this atrocity has failed to distinguish, in every case, between terrorists and innocent civilians in Gaza. Will we continue to uphold a world order based on law, or will we allow power politics and strategic alliances to dictate when international law applies and when it does not? Just last week, the US President sanctioned officials at the ICC for daring to investigate potential war crimes committed by Israeli forces, another dangerous precedent that undermines international justice. We cannot abide there. We must stand by international law. We must respect the ruling of the ICJ. Yeah.
Andy Slaughter.
Pleasure to be here, and I thank my honourable friend for achieving this debate, which is very timely. 2 minutes isn't too onerous on this occasion because there's really only one question to be asked, which is when will the government respond to the advisory opinion? Yes, it is a very significant piece of work, and yes, it will take some time, but we have had 7 months, so I hope we might get indication from the Minister today as to how long it will be before that happens. It is going to be difficult for the government to respond to, because this is not just about Gaza, it's about East Jerusalem and about the West Bank. It has fundamental implications for the existence, continued existence of settlements, let alone their expansion, and about trade with those settlements. And there are inconsistencies already in government policy, of the last government as well as this government, in terms of allowing that trade to continue when we recognise the settlements as being illegal. It is about segregation of the Palestinian population and the enforcement of that segregation, particularly on the West Bank, and it's about the transfer of population, which we've heard a lot about in the last few weeks. So this is going to be a difficult decision for the government, because the implications of them agreeing with the judgment are that, and the Minister said that he does agree with the central findings of this, notwithstanding the fact that the UK abstained in the vote. The implications are very powerful for our relations with Israel. And Israel is a friendly country, and yes, I'll give way.
Thank you very much. And on that point, and following on from the previous speaker, isn't the key issue here about whether the UK is going to abide by international law and the rules-based order and the systems that were set up after the Second World War, or not?
Yeah, Andy Slaughter. It's absolutely right there. And there is conflict between some of the political instincts the government will have. They say Israel is an ally, but sometimes you have to speak strongly to your friends as much as you do to your enemies. And the reality is that the UK has particular responsibilities here. It has historic responsibilities, going right back to the Balfour Declaration and the mandate. It has moral responsibilities here, and it has power and influence as a member of the Security Council, and we should, this government, rather than unlike the last government, should take that seriously. This issue goes to the heart of the problems of the Middle East, and resolving it is resolving issues between Israel and Palestine will unlock peace in the Middle East. What is happening at the moment is exactly the reverse of that. So I think we have a government that says very clearly through the Attorney General it believes in the rule of law. That is to be admired, but we must see that in its in the way that it responds to this opinion, and I hope we see that soon.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, James. Good morning. It's a pleasure to serve on your chairship, and I thank the honourable member for securing this very important debate. As he set out in his introductory remarks, this is a historic judgment on a historic opinion from the ICJ, and it has very significant implications for the UK government. It adds to the growing international consensus that the actions of the Israeli government constitute apartheid, a consensus that's articulated by states, by NGOs, by Israeli as well as Palestinian organisations, by Israeli politicians, Israeli newspapers. And this is very meaningful for the UK because, as the ICJ opinion set out, third states have obligations deriving from that opinion. Third states have an obligation not to recognise as legal the illegal occupation, not to render aid or assistance in maintaining that situation, to abstain from entering into economic or trade dealings with Israel concerning the occupied Palestinian territory, and to take steps to prevent trade or investment relations that assist in the maintenance of that illegal situation. And so I would like to ask the Minister, in his summing up, please, to answer 5 specific questions. Given that opinion, it seems absolutely crystal clear that the UK must end all arms sales to Israel, including dual-use items, that it must end any military surveillance partnership that could be contributing to rendering aid in maintenance of this illegal situation, that it must regulate the private sector. There are credible reports of complicity on the part of private sector organisations, not least oil and gas companies, in providing fuel that maintains the unlawful occupation. 4th, that it should ban the import of products from illegal settlements. And 5th, that it should suspend the UK's current trade agreement with Israel and negotiations over any new trade agreement pending a proper and thorough review of the international human rights implications of this. In order to get peace, the occupation must be ended.
Jazz Atwell.
Thank you very much, David Donner, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship. The conflict in Gaza has undoubtedly devastated communities, decimated areas and destroyed countless lives. Each and every day the death toll rises, further lives are extinguished, futures are lost forever. Our government has worked extensively with the international community to support a desperately needed ceasefire in the region. And of course, we can always do more. A ceasefire that was hard-fought, painstakingly negotiated, a ceasefire which finally not only delivered peace but also hope. We welcomed with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, a ceasefire which I know brought small comfort to my constituents in Ilford South. After 15 months of death, destruction and violence, we have witnessed hostages returning to their families and prisoners freed in exchange. Too often, in such immense tragedies, when scale of destruction is so severe, individuals are forgotten. When we talk of death tolls of raw numbers, the son, the husband, the brother, the father is lost. Seeing the hostages and prisoners reunited with loved ones brings into stark reality the human cost of ongoing violence in the region. As we stand here today, less than 2 weeks after the ceasefire was announced, it hangs in jeopardy. The lives and liberty of so many hang in the balance. Gaza is not a political tool. Gaza is a home to millions of Palestinians. As the Prime Minister has said recently, Palestinians must be allowed home. We cannot revert back to the violence. We cannot accept further death and destruction. We know the only viable solution to unrest in the region is a free Palestinian state alongside a secure Israel. To support anything else would be to tolerate further suffering and violation of international law. Thank you.
James McCleary.
Securing this debate. The situation in the Middle East is one of the greatest humanitarian crises of our time. Gaza is in ruins, tens of thousands dead, including, tragically, many children. Meanwhile, Israeli families are still mourning the loved ones lost to Hamas's brutal attack on October the 7th, and many hostages remain in captivity. Across the region, civilians are paying the price for political failure and international inaction. And now, with United States President Donald Trump's reckless Gaza plan, the current fragile truce is ever more endangered. We cannot ignore the deepening humanitarian catastrophe. Hospitals should never be battlegrounds, nor should their doctors be detained. Doctors and nurses must be allowed to do their jobs in safety, and aid must be allowed into Gaza at scale. And those responsible for blocking it should face real consequences. Let's not equivocate. The obstruction of humanitarian aid is a breach of the Geneva Convention and constitutes a war crime. Yeah. Then there is the issue of illegal settlements and settler violence in the West Bank. The expansion of settlements is not only illegal under international law, it's a direct obstacle to peace. The UK must be willing to act including ending trade with illegal settlements as specified in the ICJ opinion and holding to account those inciting violence. The immediate priority must be a lasting ceasefire, the return of hostages, including the release of prisoners like Dr. Abu Safia, and urgent humanitarian relief. Beyond that, there must be a real political effort, one that doesn't just manage this crisis but ends it. That means real pressure on all sides to make sure this current ceasefire lasts, to respect international law, and finally deliver a solution in which both Palestinian and Israeli people can live in peace and safety. Thank you, Chair.
I apologise for this, but a desire to get everybody in means that I now reduce it to 1 minute, and I call Richard Bergen.
Thank you. We need action, not words. The ICJ ruling means we need to see real action from our government, and that means widespread sanctions. And I recently coordinated a letter to the Foreign Secretary of my colleague, the Honourable Member for Bradford East, supported by over 60 parliamentarians from 7 political parties, calling on our government to impose comprehensive sanctions. Now, what do specific sanctions mean? Impose targeted sanctions against state actors, ban import of illegal settlement products, the total and immediate arms ban, including F-35s, revoking the 2030 roadmap. This special UK partnership with Israel seeks to deepen economic, trade and security ties. How on earth would it be acceptable to do that with a state faced with serious allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide? The UN General Assembly has endorsed this approach that sanctions are necessary. We now need the political will to put this moral and legal imperative into practice.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan, and I thank the member for Allo and Grangemouth for getting the debate today. I was at the ICJ when the South African application was originally made, and I think we should congratulate South Africa on what it put forward and the work that it's done in respect of bringing about the appliance of international law for Palestinians. For the record, the judgment included settlement activities in breach of Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention, Israel's attempt to annex parts of the Palestinian territories, and violations of international law prohibiting racial segregation and apartheid. These are very, very serious cases indeed. What we need to hear from the British government is that they fully accept and fully support all the decisions of the ICJ and that they will implement them. And the last word I'd say is this: if we continue supplying weapons to a country that's in violation of international law, we ourselves are in violation of international law.
Yeah. Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Dave Siobhan. Served with you, Chair. Thank my honourable friend for securing the debate. The Israeli occupation annexation is unlawful, and I just gently say to my honourable friend from Strangford that we cannot pick and choose where that applies. There is no exemption for Israel. But I want to ask 3 questions about settlement goods. So I asked the Minister, can the Minister set out what legislative and regulatory steps the government has considered to prohibit UK nationals, companies and financial institutions from conducting business in or with illegal Israeli settlements? Has the UK taken any measure towards banning trade in settlement goods, such as effective tracking systems and so on? And will the UK ban investments in Israeli companies or banks that are contributing to maintaining Israel's unlawful occupation? Thank you, Siobhan.
Tracy Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I want to thank my friend, the Honourable Member for Alloa and Grangemouth, for securing this important debate. Whilst our closest ally is rubbish in international courts, we must not go down that path, and I welcome the statement to this effect that has been made by the Government. Madam Chair, as my time is brief, I want to focus on one argument in particular. Occupations are never planned to be extraordinarily long. Israeli occupation is now 57 years long, as this was reflected in Judge Youssef's separate opinion. If the occupation continues, I fear that this will become increasingly difficult to apply international law to the situation on the ground. I am therefore keen to hear from the Minister what approach the Government is taking to ensure the current fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas can become a long-lasting peace with a two-state solution. That is the only way that this extraordinarily long occupation will be brought to an end in the interests of Israeli and Palestinian people.
Steve Witherden.
Pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dame Siobhan. And can I also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Alloa and Grangemouth, on securing this important debate. Last week, Barrister Sam Fowles warned parliamentarians of the very real risk that the UK could be in breach of international law. Given the ICJ's advisory opinion that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is unlawful and the UK's membership of the UN, the government must impose sanctions on Israel to undermine their illegal occupation. Israel is on trial for genocide, so the current partial suspension of arms licences needs to go further. I will say it again. The UK must impose an immediate and total ban on arms export licences. Furthermore, whilst the government acknowledges the illegality of Israeli settlements, it continues to import goods from them. Illegal settlement products should not be regarded as Israeli goods and should be banned from entering the UK. With the US administration openly calling...
I am sorry, but I asked the member to sit down. I apologise. I know he's waited for a very long time to make his contribution. Can I call Callum Miller, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, 5 minutes?
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. It's a pleasure to speak with you as our chair. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for Alloa and Grangemouth for securing this important debate. He introduced it with clarity and power. Thank you too to honourable and right honourable members who have spoken already. This has been a passionate and compelling discussion. Liberal Democrats have long argued that the UK should uphold the rule of law and the role of international institutions in our foreign policy, as my honourable friend from Honiton and Sidmouth has done today. The post-1945 rules-based order was forged by Churchill and other leaders and has endured until now. It not only holds moral weight, but is also in the interests of democracies like the UK. For this reason, we believe that as a member, the UK should observe the opinions and judgments of both the ICJ and the ICC. We think it is irresponsible for Conservative members to say, as they often do in the Chamber, that these are foreign courts. They may be located overseas, but they have legitimate jurisdiction over the UK because previous governments, both Conservative and Labour, have consented to this. Trying to portray them as a threat to UK sovereignty is not only false but damaging, as it undermines the likelihood of other states accepting their jurisdiction.
On that point,
briefly.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and it's a very pertinent point. With regards to the international rules-based order, we are seeing at the moment where the ICJ is investigating genocide and states are acting as though it's not investigating genocide. We've seen the International Criminal Court threatened directly by the most powerful country in the world, and we see international hypocrisy and double standards like we've never seen before. Surely the international rules-based order is not only collapsing but is dying before our very eyes if the UK government and others do not act now.
Thank you. The honourable member makes a powerful point to which I'm sure the Minister will wish to respond. Members like my honourable friend, the member for Lewis, have been right to recognise the terrible level of violence we've seen over the last 16 months since the atrocities committed by Hamas on the 7th of October. We are moved to tears and anger when we hear of the deaths of infants in tents and hospitals in Gaza. At the same time, we are shocked and appalled to see the emaciated state of hostages like Eli Sharabi as they are released in a gruesome pageant from Hamas captivity. There has been inhumane cruelty towards innocent civilians. This underscores why the rule of law matters. The ICC is right to consider cases against leaders on both sides. The UK should enforce these warrants. It's been impossible for us, Dame Siobhan, to consider the ICJ opinion today without reference to the proposals for Gaza that were put forward by President Trump last week, as my honourable friend, the member for St Ives, highlighted. Since the 5th of November, Liberal Democrats have pointed out that President Trump would be unpredictable and that the UK needed to put itself in a position of strength so as not to get swept into the chaos that the new resident of the White House would unleash. Since the ICJ's opinion was delivered in July 2024, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories has worsened appreciably. Northern Gaza has been flattened and its citizens placed under displacement orders. Gaza is today riddled with unexploded ordnance, even as Palestinians return home under the fragile ceasefire. In the West Bank, settlement expansion has continued, and the IDF has continued arbitrarily to detain Palestinians and to protect illegal settlements. The Israeli Knesset has outlawed UNRWA. Extremist members of the Israeli cabinet have continued to call for the annexation of the West Bank and welcome President Trump's suggestion that Palestinians be forced from Gaza. Yet the ICJ's opinion is clear. It creates obligations on other states, including the UK. These include supporting Palestinian rights to self-determination, taking steps to prevent trade or investment that assist in maintaining the illegal situation, and not to render aid or assistance that maintain the situation. It's in response to this call that Liberal Democrats have repeatedly called on the government to take the following steps. Legislate to cease trade with illegal settlements in the occupied territories, sanction those who advocate illegal settler expansion or violence by settlers towards Palestinians, in particular Minister Smotrich and former Minister Ben-Gvir, restrict all arms sales to Israel, including component parts for F-35 aircraft, since these have been used against Palestinians in the occupied territories, and immediately recognise the state of Palestine. Ministers have repeatedly refused to take these steps.
I don't have the power to ask you to stop,
I'm sorry,
but if you wouldn't mind just coming to an end, that would be good.
I'm taking account of the intervention. I shall be very brief. I'm most frustrated by the consistent refusal by ministers to recognise Palestine. If the government is serious about working with all partners to restore a pathway to a two-state solution, this cannot happen when only one party enjoys state recognition. Failing to act empowers the extremists on both sides. The time has come to recognise the state of Palestine.
Wendy Morton, Opposition spokesperson.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And I commend the honourable member for Alloa and Grangemouth on securing this debate. We, of course, continue to follow developments stemming from this case at the ICJ carefully, and note that the ICJ itself has been far from unanimous about the advisory opinion. We understand the Labour government's position is that it agrees with the central findings of the ICJ's advisory opinion. But can the Minister tell us whether he actually thinks court cases such as this are an effective way to try and bring about peace between Israelis and Palestinians? And can he be very clear today that under no circumstances should we be drawing any kind of moral equivalence between Hamas and the democratically elected government of Israel? I now want to address the immediate situation in Israel and Gaza, which remains extremely fragile. The announcement by Hamas that it is that postponing hostage releases will be a cause of concern and anxiety for the families of the hostages and all who care about their appalling captivity. So can the Minister therefore explain what direct engagement the government and ministers have had with the Israeli government, the US administration and our partners in the region in response? The hostages held in horrific and inhumane conditions in Gaza must be returned to their loved ones, both in accordance with the terms of Phase 1 of the ceasefire and in the subsequent stage. We have, of course, been relieved to see the release of the hostages freed so far under this agreement, including British-Israeli national Emily Damari, and I sincerely hope all those who've been freed from captivity can now begin to build their lives after the most unimaginable trauma, and nobody should doubt that trauma. We've all seen the shocking scenes of hostages being paraded by Hamas prior to their handover, and the shocking images of the release of Or Levy, Eli Sharabi and Ohad Ben Army on Saturday. We must also acknowledge the tragic death of 86-year-old Shlomo Mansour, who we now understand was killed during the appalling Hamas attacks on October the 7th. His body has been held hostage in Gaza, and we think today of his family and friends at what must be an unimaginably distressing time. The hostages who remain in the hands of Hamas are at the forefront of our minds, as are the poor families who have suffered so much and continue to anxiously wait for news about their loved ones. The news that 8 hostages will not be returning to their loved ones alive is tragic. The days and weeks ahead may be very difficult for Israel and the Jewish community, and we must support them. We must again ask the UK government to continue to work overtime alongside our partners to exert pressure and help move the obstacles stopping humanitarian access to those who continue to be held hostage by Hamas. This is an important point, and it doesn't always receive the attention it deserves. So I'd say to the government, it must not jeopardise the UK's relationship or undermine trust and confidence with the government of Israel if it wants to continue having a serious and in-depth dialogue about the present situation and the future of Gaza. So if the Minister could update on the delivery of British aid to Gaza since last week's urgent question, that would be appreciated. Now, as to what the future could look like, we're not even close to Phase 3 of the current agreement. We should not get ahead of ourselves. But to restate our long-standing position on regional peace, we support a two-state solution that guarantees security and stability for both the Israeli and Palestinian people. Our long-standing position has been that we will recognise a Palestinian state at a time that is most conducive to the peace process. We are not at that point now, and we are clear that recognition cannot be the start of the process. Israeli hostages remain in captivity and every single one must be released. Ensuring Hamas is no longer in charge of Gaza and removing Hamas's capacity to launch attacks against Israel are also essential and unavoidable steps on the road to lasting peace. Our immediate focus must be getting the hostages out and getting the aid in, then making progress towards a sustainable end to the current conflict. And if the Palestinian Authority is to have an expanded role, it needs to implement the most significant reforms in its history, including to its welfare and education policies. And of course, it must demonstrate democratic progress. And this will be clearly important for its operations in the West Bank too. There are steps we'd like to take, Israel to take too, as we've said before, in relation to frozen funds and settlements. And more generally, we want the UK to be actively involved in efforts to expand the Abraham Accords. So to finish, I do also want to comment on the other major ICJ case briefly, that brought by South Africa, which I have serious concerns about, and I do not believe it to be helpful in the goal of achieving a sustainable end to the current conflict. So to conclude, although formal determination of genocide should be based upon the final judgment of a competent court, the Conservative government, when in power, was very clear that Israel's actions in Gaza cannot be described as genocide.
I am sorry, I'm not able to, I don't have the power to ask you to sit down, but I would be very
almost
grateful.
There, Dame Siobhan. We will carefully continue to scrutinise the Labour government, and I would welcome any updates from the Minister. Thank you.
I call the Minister.
Thank you, Dave Siobhan. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate. I'll try to make some progress in the speech. I imagine many colleagues will want to intervene, but I'm keen to give my honourable friend a chance to respond at the end, so I'll limit the number of interventions that I take. Many members have spoke movingly of the horrific scenes that we have seen right across this conflict. And it is right, as many members have drawn attention to, for all of our minds to be on the ceasefire at this time. It is vital that the ceasefire continues through this weekend and beyond, through all three of its phases, on time and in full. That is the most important intervention that the international community can make for the people of Gaza and the people of Israel at this time. I want to reiterate from here, as the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have done repeatedly, the UK is fully committed to international law. When the Prime Minister addressed the UN General Assembly last year, he urged UN members to turn back towards the rule of law, towards cooperation, responsibility and progress, and towards peace. I will in a minute. We demonstrated our commitment to international law in September when the Foreign Secretary announced to Parliament the decision to suspend relevant export licences to Israel. I'd like to reassure my honourable friends that those export licences, that is not a partial suspension, that is a full suspension. I won't rehearse the F-35 arguments, but those suspensions do cover drones and do cover the kind of attacks that Professor Mahmoud has been briefing so movingly about. That decision was made following the Foreign Secretary's review into Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law, which concluded that there was a clear risk that UK exports could be used in violation of international humanitarian law. We're currently continuing with those assessments, and we keep all aspects of our exports policy under close review.
John McDonnell.
Statement about the British government complying with international law, because a number of us are concerned about complicity. Mark Smith, the diplomat who resigned because of his concern about arms sales to Israel, wrote 3 days ago, "I saw illegality and complicity with war crimes." Has there been an investigation into Mark Smith's allegations?
Minister.
My honourable friend will understand I don't want to comment too much on an individual case, but the diplomat in question was not engaged in this issue specifically since our government has been in power, so I'm not sure that there was a question for us to answer that. The member for Honiton Sidmouth asked about the advisory opinion of the ICJ. The UK has traditionally been a strong supporter of the ICJ, is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, and this government respects its independence. I'll make a little bit more progress if I may. As the Foreign Secretary and others have made clear, we continue to consider the opinion carefully. The Right Honourable Member for Hammersmith and, my Right Honourable friend from Hammersmith and Chiswick rightly identifies the complexity and the novel elements of that advisory opinion, so we are taking our time in considering it. I hope to be able to return to the House in due course. It contains novel findings. They require further reflection. I understand his desire to know quickly our position, but honourable members will appreciate that such an important decision necessarily takes time and careful consideration. The advisory opinion in itself took months in its development and will take some months in its... I will give way. I don't know who's...
You've got to name who you're giving way to.
I'll give name to...
Will the decision about the advisory opinion be before or after the Swiss conference in March?
Minister.
Chair, I'm not going to be drawn on precise timings, and I'm happy to give way to my colleague who I skipped.
To my honourable friend. Thank you, Chair. In its judgment, the court also stated that Israel is under an obligation to provide full reparations to Palestinian victims, full reparations for their damage and destruction. It's a key part of securing peace. Can I ask the Minister, how will our government ensure that not only UK aid and international aid flows in, but reparations are paid to the people of Palestine?
So, Chair, I'm not going to comment further on how we're going to respond to the advisory opinion. It is in process, and I hope to be able to update the House soon. I'm going to, recognising that time is running away from me, I'm not going to take any more interventions. I'm going to very quickly run through some of the other issues that were raised most regularly. So, in relation to trade, I want to be clear. The UK government considers Israeli settlements illegal under international law, and goods produced in these settlements are not entitled to benefit from trade and trade preferences under the UK's current trade agreements with the Palestinian Authority and Israel. We support accurate labelling of settlement goods so as not to mislead the consumer. We routinely update our guidance to British businesses on the Overseas Business Risk website and advise British businesses to bear in mind the UK government's view on the illegality of settlements under international law when considering their investments and activities in the region. There have been many questions, Chair, about statements from the US President. So let me briefly turn to those. The UK has always been clear, and we remain clear, we must see two states, with Palestinians able to live and prosper in their homelands, in Gaza, in the West Bank. There must be no forced displacement of Palestinians, nor any reduction in the territory of the Gaza Strip. Palestinians should be able to return and rebuild their homes and their lives. That is a right guaranteed under international law. We need to move, as I said before, Chair, through the phases of this ceasefire deal towards reconstruction. We will play our part in supporting that reconstruction, working alongside the Palestinian Authority and Gulf and Arab partners. Let me end by reiterating this government's commitment to international law. We continue to consider the advisory opinion carefully, with the seriousness and the rigour that it deserves. Our long-standing position is that Israel should bring an end to its presence in the OPTs as rapidly as possible. This should be done in a way that creates a path for negotiations towards a two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace. That is what we will continue to press for with our international partners at every opportunity. And I'd like to close by saying that my thoughts are with those in Gaza and in Israel, suffering with terrible uncertainty at the moment, and we must all hope for the preservation of the ceasefire. And I and the rest of the ministers of the Foreign Office will do everything in our power to preserve it. Thank you, Chair.
Brian Leishman, very quickly.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. I will be brief in my closing comments. I would like to thank the Minister for his response, the Shadow Minister, the spokesperson from the Liberal Democrats, and all right honourable and honourable members for their contributions. It's my opinion that the Minister didn't cover and answer all the questions that I set out, so I will submit them in writing in future. And while there is currently a ceasefire, the humanitarian emergency facing Palestinians is very much ongoing, and peace in the Middle East looks a very fragile thing indeed. I will also include in my letter to the Minister suggesting that he looks into Mark Smith's comments in greater detail, as he does detail that senior officials and government ministers protected arms deals.
Order. The sitting stands adjourned. Thank you, every member, for their cooperation.